Hey y'all, what's up? It's Amanda and I am back with another video. So today's video is going to be my 2024 reading goals as well as a look at my reading stats for 2023. We got a lot to talk about today, so let's just get right on into the video. To start off, we are going to be talking about my stats. I personally love the app, the Story Graph. I always have my social medias linked in the description down below, so add me on there. I have Instagram, Threads, TikTok, the Story Graph, and Goodreads. Like I said though, I primarily use the Story Graph for my reading tracking and getting stats. So my first stat, let's just go over real quick. I read last year 106 books, which is the most books I've ever read in one year, one calendar year before. The closest that I got to 100 was in 2021. I read like 92 or 93 books. But yeah, this past year in 2023, I read 106 books. I read 30,756 pages and 24.83 hours. Now that one isn't super accurate because with my audiobook listening, the way that I like to read, I primarily will have the physical book as well as an audiobook to be listening to. So I definitely read more than 24.83 hours. This number just reflects all the books that I read solely via audiobook. Like I didn't have a physical book or an ebook with it. I just listened to the audiobook. So that's that. Let's see, my next stat. The genres that I spent the most time with in 2023 are romance, which is my top genre, fantasy, which I was surprised at, but I did read a lot of fantasy this year, I feel like. So that kind of like, looking back on it, like kind of makes sense. Contemporary, LGBTQIA+ is the fourth one, and then graphic novels was the fifth one. The longest book I read was Spare by Prince Harry because I read the large type version just so I could get it faster through my library. That was 664 pages, and the shortest book I read was In Mercy Reign by Shauna Maguire. That was 24 pages. The average length of the books I read was 282 pages, and it took me around 9 days to finish each book. The book that I read in the least amount of time was Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna Maguire. I read that in one day. The book that took the most amount of time for me to finish was Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth, which took me 77 days to finish. That's because I started it and then I realized I couldn't find the audiobook anywhere. So it took me a while to continue to physically read it. I'm so reliant on audiobooks nowadays, but then I finally found the audiobook, so then I quickly finished it after that. The authors I spent the most time with in 2023 were Alice Oseman because I reread all of Heartstopper in time for the release of Heartstopper Volume 5. Then Kimberly Lemming because I read her whole romance series. That's like That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, and then That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Werewolf, and then I also read the novella called Mistletoe or something like that. And then Suzanne Collins is the third author because I reread The Hunger Games this year. My average rating in 2023 was a 4.2 stars, and then in 2023 I had a bunch of 5-star reads. I had 32 5 stars, and I'll share a little graphic of all my star ratings here. My highest rated month was May, which I rated on average a 4.64 for my books, and December wasn't my favorite month, which my average rating was a 3.96, which is still pretty high, I feel like. August was where I read the most pages. I read 4,340 pages. My most shelved book that I read this year was The Hunger Games, and my least shelved book was this picture book that I read called Adios Oscar, which had only 17 people shelve it. The highest rated book by other users that I read this year was Viola Davis's Finding Me, which that has an average of 4.63 stars on the story graph. I explored the works of 60 new authors, including Ethan Joella, Sierra Miller, and Claribel A. Ortega. 47 of the books I read were part of a series, and I revisited a total of 6 books this year. I DNF'd 13 books that I picked up this year. I completed the Buzzword Reading Challenge this year. I always try to do that every year. For pacing, 7% of the books that I read were slow-paced, 57% were medium-paced, and 37% were fast-paced. For page number, 50% of the books I read were less than 300 pages, 47% were between 300 and 499 pages, and then 3% were 500 plus pages. For my fiction and nonfiction, I read 84% fiction and 16% nonfiction. For format, I read 6% solely digital, 4% solely audio, and 91% print, which the 91% print is probably like a good portion of that, if not all of those 91 print books are read with the audiobook as well. Unless it's a graphic novel. I don't read audiobooks for graphic novels. And yeah, I believe that's it for stats. Now that we went over my stats, we are going to go on to my goals for 2024. For my reading goals, my official reading goal is to read 85 books in 1 year. So I know last year I read over 100 books, but do I think that's gonna happen again? There's like a 30% chance that that's going to happen again. But I mostly think that no, I'm not going to be able to hit 100 again. Especially because I'm planning on starting grad school in the fall, so I don't know like how busy I'm going to be with that. Another goal that I have is to read more nonfiction. So I think I talked about in my stats that I read 16% nonfiction this past year. And I want to read closer to 20 to 25% nonfiction and 75 to 80% of fiction. One stat that I wish I had, but I don't right now is, okay, I got cut off in the middle of my sentence. But a stat that I want to keep track of is how many books that I read are books that I physically own myself instead of like books that I got from the library. And for this, I want, out of all the books I read in 1 year, I want at least 50% of them to be books that I own. So I don't know how I'm going to keep track of that. Maybe the story graph will have something that I can keep track of. I don't know. Also, I want to go on a book buying ban for 6 months. So it's January. I'm officially on my book buying ban. I have seen people talk about how they do like variations of book buying bans. So they're like, oh, after 10 books that I've read that are on my physical TBR, I can buy 1 book. I'm just gonna say 0 books for me, to be honest. As long as I can make it, I think, okay, here's my thing. I think if I make it through January without buying a single book, then I'll be fine. Like I can just continue this trend. So we'll see. I want to get to the end of June without buying any books. This next one is I want to get my physical TBR below 200. So my physical TBR, I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but I think it's like 240 books. So as long as I read at least 40 books, which will be about, if I make it to 80, 85, which is my goal, that's like half of 85, you know what I mean? So if I am able to read 40 books off of my physical TBR this year, I'll be happy. I just want to get it below 200 books. And lastly, I want to use the library more. So this one, I don't know how I feel about it because I feel like I use my library a lot right now. But I just think that it'll come in handy for the times when I want to go out and buy a book and instead I'm like, no, I have to wait for the library book to come in. So that's what I mean by that, because I do use my library, like especially the Libby app. I use that all the time. Like I'm almost always have something out through Libby for me to either listen to or like read with my eyes. You know what I mean? Those are my goals for 2024 as well as my stats for 2023. In the comments, let me know how many books you read this past year and what your favorite book was. I really am interested to know. I like to see what other people are reading, especially if it's like very different from what I'm reading. Like I just want to know what people are reading. But anyways, like I said, all my socials will be linked in the description, just as another reminder. I have Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Storygraph, and Goodreads, so add me or friend me on those. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.